You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
وتكلم من هناك لشوارزنيجر
Va a pegarle Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
Buckle in, folks. It's Friday. Thank you, Grant. And there's a lot going on, a lot to unpack today in what's going to be, I think, a full-length Soccer Today. Before we get into all of the domestic stuff, and there's some interesting Canadian Premier League news that came out yesterday. It was a big Canadian Premier League news day. We're going to get to that in our third segment. But before that, we have to unpack what is the biggest game in the world, the game that we look forward to each and every year, the Champions League final, which, of course, is tomorrow. Juventus, Real Madrid. Kristan Heneage from the front three joins us. Christian, how are you doing?
I'm not too bad, thanks. How are you?
Good, good. Look, I guess we'll just start with this. How excited are you about this game?
Massively so. I think it's a meeting of two teams, one that has an incredibly strong defence in Juventus and Real Madrid, which I think is so often defined by its attacking pieces and what they can do in the final third.
Fair enough. Look, let's start with Real Madrid. Kevin and I have had a conversation on the show for the past week or so, wondering out loud whether we're not giving this Real Madrid club enough credit for being among the greatest of all time. Do you think that they need to win tomorrow to start being really put into those kind of conversations? And if they do win tomorrow, do we really need to start considering them that way?
I think so, because the Champions League means a lot to them. That's the thing. It's very much etched in their identity, and I think you look at the history in the competition, it's firmly implanted in there. And I see the point that you're making. I think when you win the Champions League, it does elevate you, because then you are the best team in Europe, theoretically. You're not just dominating domestically. It pushes you into the Club World Cup, for example, which again gives you a chance to further cement your status. And if you look at some of the greatest teams that we've had in world football, usually they've had that European competition alongside them to almost cement their legend and the legacy. So I think, yes, it's important that they win. I think just for themselves as well, because I think, again, they invest so much in this competition and have been so defined by it, and at times come so close to winning it and failed, unfortunately.
When we talk about Madrid, there's back-to-back with the possibility on tomorrow, if they win, of the Champions League champions. And a lot of great things have been said about Madrid and Zidane and Ronaldo and Isco and Bale and Benzema. How important is the chemistry of all those stars? We don't necessarily talk about it enough, but Zinedine Zidane, he comes in as a rookie coach with the biggest locker room of egos and finds a way quickly to maybe establish himself as the biggest ego and able to manage those egos. How do you see that locker room with the presence of stars almost like a galaxy?
I think what Zidane has been able to do is he's taken his own experience. That's the thing. You look at his predecessor, the man that came before him, in Rafa Benitez, and he didn't have that same career, that same pathway to the Real Madrid job. And I think because of that, it meant he couldn't command respect in the same way. There was stories in the Spanish press at the time saying that they had nicknamed Benitez the number 10 because he was telling them how to play when really he hadn't been much of a player himself. And I think with Zidane, he's obviously a globally recognized name first and foremost, but I think he did it at Real Madrid. That's the most important thing of all. You could have been a star at another club, but I think when you've been through the locker room and then gravitated up to the front office in the way that he did when he became sporting director, you see very different perspectives on the same situation. And I think because of that, it means he's able to come in and then also command a respect with them. But I think what you can't underplay is the tactical aspect, because it's so easy to say, well, clearly he's just a man manager that's pushed them all into this harmonious unit. No, I think he's built a team, and I think what he's done is he's seen the team as a whole from more than just the prism of his position, because obviously he was a midfielder, and I think if you look at some of the game's greatest who go into management, it's very easy to get locked into just seeing the game from your perspective that you had on the field, whereas I think he has an understanding of how the defense impacts the midfield and vice versa, and how that plays into the attack. And overall, I think that's what's helped him build harmony, not just in the dressing room with the players, but also on the field when they're actually playing.
And that brings me to the other question. This team is way more than Ronaldo, but Ronaldo is having a career to remember. Yes, I know. But a few seasons to maybe define his career. The amount of trophies, the amount of gold, the amount of moments, and the amount of, sometimes we forget, but selfless moment too, where he actually gives the ball to his teammates. What is your thoughts on Ronaldo and how the last few years in the Champions League especially, he has literally stepped up?
Well, I think in the same way that Madrid tied themselves to the Champions League, I think Ronaldo does the same. I think you look at the domestic leagues he's won, there's always seemed something a little bit more special about the Champions League with him. And I think you look at his career, I think he's become more refined in so much as it's just about goals now. It's about his ability to score in big moments. You look at the Bayern Munich tie being a really good example of that. I don't think he's the same player that I used to watch for Manchester United, who would do tricks and drive at people and things like that. I think now he's become more focused. And I think what he started to appreciate ever so slightly is that he does need those teammates around him. There's been instances where in the past Real Madrid would score a goal and he wouldn't celebrate, or he wouldn't seem as invested in the moment. But I think now, as he's aging, I think he's mellowing slightly in that regard and seeing the benefit of having good teammates around you and the positions that they put him in. Because I think, if anything, to me at least, seems as if they've accepted that he's the figurehead and he's the leader of the situation. And I think that's helped everyone.
Let's talk about Gigi. Let's talk about Mr. Buffon, who's he doesn't seem to age. He seems to have everything going on that he did 10 years ago. You can't even imagine him retiring at this point. But there has been some conversation about the possibility of him even being considered for, the World Player of the Year. It seems absurd that a keeper might get that, but is he really the engine that drives this club? It is so defensively solid, obviously, but does Buffon have to throw up the clean sheet, maybe pull something out of the hat, something for the ages to have Juventus win this?
I think relative to his usual performance level, no, I think he has to play to what we expect. I think he's a wonderful goalkeeper that is aging like wine in so many ways, because it's his understanding and his positioning. I don't think he's a superhuman athlete, but I think what he's done is he's understood the game and taken a lesson from each and every performance. And you look at that Juventus team, yes, I think the defenders in front of him are fantastic individually and as a collective, but I think so often they take confidence from having him behind them. Because I think you look at a team, if you know your goalkeeper is reliable, if you know that he's got you covered, for want of a better phrase, I think that influences the way you play. I think that gives you more confidence. I think it influences the decisions you make and the way that you handle situations. So personally, I'd not be disappointed if Juventus won, because I think it's a wonderful moment for Buffon and something that he deserves almost. But I wouldn't be surprised if he had a very standard performance by his levels and they still managed to win.
Let's turn our attention to the other side of the ball for Juventus. They are obviously, they're going to need to score unless this goes to penalties at some point, right? So just tell us how they tactically break down this Real Madrid team so that they can find the back of the net enough times to win this game.
I think they have to be patient. You look at the way they approach Barcelona when the last Champions League final they were in. I saw what they were trying to do, and I thought actually there was a lot of thought that had clearly gone into that. I think you can almost use that same style and the style that they used against Barcelona in the tournament this season to try and break Real Madrid down, which is to to not be afraid to give them the ball and let them try and do what they want to do, and then exploit the gaps that they leave, essentially be a counterpuncher. And if there's one thing that Juventus can do, it's organize themselves very well, sit in a very disciplined block, and then spring, because you have someone like Paulo Dybala who, Dani Alves said it himself this week, there's shades of Messi in there, in so much as he's got the talent. Yes, I think they're very different players stylistically, but he's also got the determination. And you look at the way that he's defined the Champions League for them this season with goals against Barcelona. That for me is the kind of player that I would be looking to in a moment like this and saying, okay, I think you can do something here. I think you can help us. Because I think, unfortunately, Higuain is just a little bit of an unknown quantity, because so much of his career has been defined by not scoring in big finals that you want to be pessimistic and say, well, he probably won't do it again. And yet his goals record suggests that he's got to do it eventually. There has to come a point where he takes that big final and he defines it with a goal.
You mentioned two players' names, and that's where I'm going with my two next questions. Dybala. This player has impressed me a lot this season. A coming-of-age moment. A moment where he established himself in the Champions League as the heir apparent, maybe, to a Messi in the national team of Argentina, maybe the one to do something with the national team, but more importantly, maybe the next superstar in a big club, the next big transfer. How impressive is Dybala for you, Kristan? And the fact that he's young, coming of age, and an attacking flair that we're not used to seeing with a Juventus.
Yeah, I think the thing with Dybala is you look at just his numbers, and the league goals haven't been as plentiful this season, but he's played 300 fewer minutes in the league. I think where things have shifted for him is the Champions League. I think he's got 4 goals in 10 games or something like that. So that for me is where he's been the difference maker for Juventus this season. And I think that perhaps explains ever so slightly why they bought people like him and Higuain, because with no disrespect to Serie A or the competition in there, I think Juventus feel comfortable in competing for that competition as it was. They were winning. I think they've got 6 straight now. They had five straight after Dybala's first season. So there's definitely a dominance established there. The Champions League, I don't think there was as much confidence. So they've signed players, I think, that have that difference maker moment in them, that X factor. And you look at Dybala, and you could definitely argue that he's set up to come to fruition with that on Saturday against Real Madrid.
An article was published on the Players Tribune yesterday by Dani Alves. A very heartwarming cry. It made me tear up a little bit. It was dusty where I was reading it, but that article talking about where he's coming from, his debut, the rise up until where he is, and the moment that every morning he goes in front of the mirror and says, I came from nowhere and I'm here. Let's make the most out of it. Dani Alves, maybe one of the key players in Juventus if they have a shot defensively to stifle Madrid. Important player for Juventus, no?
I think so. I think not just from a defensive end. It's so difficult not to go back to that game against Barcelona, not just because that was a game that meant so much to Alves, but I think that's where you saw his benefit so much, because he was influential in the final third. I also think he was very important in stopping Neymar in the other end of the field. So I think it's fair to say, and Alves has said it himself, he wanted to make Barcelona regret letting him go. And I think firmly he's done that. And the thing with him is, much like Buffon, I think the older he's got, the more refined he's got. And the more he's understood the game and how to play it and moments when to run. And look, that's just a player applying experience. So I think for Juventus against Real Madrid, he's against potentially Marcelo, which is, I think, possibly the most difficult task he's been given during this competition. But I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if it turned out that Alves was the winner of that battle, because I think he is just such a good fullback.
Kristan, we're going to get your prediction at the very end, but let's turn our attention to a little bit of general stuff first off. And you're very close to up there to Newcastle. You cover them very closely. So I'm just going to get your take on whether they can finally sort of reach their potential, because that is a club of a size that should not be yo-yoing, which they have been in the last little while, and they did go up with some bit of style this year. So how do you think that they'll do next year in the Premier League again?
I think as it stands, I think they'll do fairly well. The difficulty Newcastle have is not just, or not even, I would say, expectation from their own supporters, but expectation from the wider public and the wider media, because so many expect, and I think have nailed home this narrative that the supporters are demanding, and it has to be Champions League every season. I think at this point, Newcastle fans are happy to show patience because they feel there's actually being a plan and a strategy implemented. And if that takes a little bit of time, that takes a little bit of time. I think Rafa Benitez is incredibly ambitious when it comes to Newcastle's first season back in that league in terms of what he wants to do and what he wants to achieve. You look at some of the players they're targeting, the likes of Smedo from Sporting, Tammy Abraham from Chelsea, and it seems to me as if they're going for the top 10. That's a very big ask, because I think the team that won the championship, it certainly had its plus points, if you will, its strengths. I also think it had notable weaknesses that would be exploited in the Premier League. I think defensively, there's still some issues there for me. I think their inability to break teams down that sit off them could be a real problem at St James's Park. So there's very much an uncertainty in that aspect about Newcastle, because you're not too sure what's going to happen. Saying that, we're in early June at this stage, and there's still a lot of business to be done, and by all accounts, there's a lot of money still to be spent. So I'm very confident that Benitez can put together a team that will do what's needed to stay up at the very least. And I think that's really all you can ask in the first season, is to stay up, consolidate, and then start to build again.
Interesting factor. You mentioned the Newcastle potential targets for this summer. Brighton and Hove Albion and Huddersfield Town are the other two teams getting promoted in the Premier League. Do you think Newcastle's going to get bigger targets than the other two? That Golden Bridge is helpful, but Newcastle is a team with a lot more deeper pockets than the other two promoted team. In how big of targets can they go for in the transfer season?
Well, I think they have to be financially prudent in many ways. There's talk that they're looking at Pepe Reina, Willy Caballero, so they clearly want some experience in goal, if nothing else. I think you look at their ability to get the likes of Gini Wijnaldum when they were last in the Premier League. That was with, I would argue, a lot less stability at the club, and I could even say a lot less appeal. I think the way they're going to attract players is going to be very different, though. This will not be a stepping stone for them. I think it'll be pitched to players as you want to come play here, and if you don't, then you're not the player for us. I would argue, I think, because of the financial clout that Premier League clubs have, they can usually, to a man, attract the better kind of players. And I think that's where someone like Benitez comes in, and you look at his resume, you look at his pedigree, and you say, well, there's someone actually that we're likely to be able to convince another high-quality player. So I think you're looking at players realistically, some of whom will lower down on the totem pole, but will have potential. But I think you'll also see some pedigreed and established names come in there just to make the first team stronger.
Christian, with the money already being spent by City, just 2 purchases already in the early part of the season, just how insane is it going to be at the top of the table in terms of that spending battle to try and win that title next year? Do you think that we're in for a hell of a ride this summer in the transfer window?
I think so. I mean, look, that's not just because the financial aspect of things will grow once again. It's also because I think teams are now willing to spend more on a player they feel can't be bought elsewhere. You look at Paul Pogba last summer. For me, I don't think that was necessarily Manchester United trying to just buy the best midfielder in Europe at the time. I think they looked at his skills and his assets and said, can we find that anywhere else for cheaper? And the truth is no. And I think, again, you look at Mbappe this summer, you look at Bernardo Silva early on with Manchester City. I think you're seeing teams being far more sure on who they want and being willing to spend a slight premium to get that.
All right, fair enough. Christian, well, I know you cover MLS too, so why don't I get a quick thought on that? What is your thoughts so far on the MLS season, and what have you taken away in terms of who you think might be standing at the end of that Supporters Shield race?
Well, I don't think the sky is falling in Minnesota. they've managed to pick some things up. The drop of the Rapids is slightly stronger than I personally would have expected. I mean, granted, they've got a few games in hand, but even still, it's not been perfect for them. I'm really impressed with Houston and the turnaround that Cabrera's put in there, because I think Eric Torres has always had talent. There's no denying that. It was just getting a system that worked for him, and I don't think the previous coaching staff really understood how to play to Eric's strengths. In terms of the supporter shield, I would quite like to see Chicago do it. I think that would be fun for them. I also think that Toronto and even FC Dallas will have a good shout, just because of the talent they've got on show.
All right, Kristan, anything you got going on that you want to promote before we say goodbye?
Nothing at the minute.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Well, we'll get you on later on this summer, maybe talk a little more MLS when we have more time, but we do appreciate your insight on Juve Real Madrid. But last thing before you go, give me a score.
I'm going to say 2-0 to Juventus.
Well, that'd be fun. All right, Kristan Heneage, thanks very much.
Cheers. Thank you.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more. Welcome back. Kevin, it is the Super Bowl of soccer, or as I like to refer to the Super Bowl, it is the Champions League of
football.
Yeah, anyway, that's more the point. I don't know if that was kind of awkward how I phrased that, but nonetheless, you get the point I'm making here. The Champions League final's bigger. That's what I'm saying, but I'm talking to people who know that.
We're talking about billions of people watching on tomorrow afternoon.
I used to love a couple years ago, the Super Bowl was being played on the same day that Chelsea and Manchester City were playing, and they were both 1-2 at the time. And, the most watched football game in the world that day was not the one played in the United States, but the Americans. American exceptionalism, you know what it is.
Exactly. There's always asterisk. Well, you have to get your hyperbole quote there, right? The biggest football game watched in the world. Asterisk. Football that has a pointy ball that is only played in one part of the world. Well, some parts too, but very scarcely. And so there's always that asterisk. But we're talking about one of the biggest sporting events every year. The last few weeks, Duane, we're talking about big sporting event. You had the Monaco Grand Prix with like 100,000 people. You had the Indy 500 with 300,000 people. You have the Champions League final with it's going to be 70-something thousand people and billions watching. We're talking about big numbers here and billions of people. Well, maybe 1 billion will be watching tomorrow. And it's kind of mind-boggling to me. Like a billion people will see Buffon play in the Champions League final. It's kind of I can't get my head around those numbers. It's like we're talking about like 1/7 of the population of the planet will tune in tomorrow.
Yeah, look, I used to like it in North America back, and I've said this before. It used to be midweek, right? Like the game used to just be played on Wednesday, the same way that the whole thing was, and everyone in North America not everyone, all of the tribe that I run in would sneak out of work and they would fill the pubs and day drink on a Wednesday afternoon, and it was always sort of something special. But now that it's been taken to the masses, I mean, I live right now in a neighborhood that is heavily Italian, so I can't even imagine what it's going to look like tomorrow. Now, that said, not every Italian is going to be supporting Juventus. Some of them are going to be out there hate cheering against them, and that's fine too. I'm sure that the bars around here will be absolutely packed, though. Look, I love this game more than any other sporting contest in the world. I hope one day to see my club in it. That's stop laughing out there. That would be something that would be one of those once in a lifetime experiences. Now you can stop laughing indeed, because I probably just said what you're all thinking out loud. Nonetheless, it should be a good time. What are your thoughts on the game? Because I'll let you go first, and then I'll jump in real quick.
I'm kind of torn. Juventus seems to me like it's their time, but Real Madrid kind of needs it to establish themselves. Like at that top level of that pedestal of maybe the greatest football team ever built. So I don't know which I want to see more. I'm a neutral in this game. I don't necessarily have a cheering aspect for any of the two. Juventus, I'm impressed by the way they've played, the way they've modified their style so that they can absorb defensively, like they're known as, but still have Dybala, Higuain up top to create some havoc, and have players like Dani Alves and Gianluigi Buffon that has history, has a like it would be a storybook ending to their career. They probably won't retire, but it'd be like the greatest moment of their career late, and you can do movies about those type of thing, right? It's like it's how movies end. So I don't know. I'm still torn between the two. I do want to see Madrid. I do think they deserve to win because of how good they are, how deep they are, how well balanced, how well coached, how well managed, the emotion, the late goals, there's a lot of good thing in how this, of course, with the money you could just buy every damn good player and just figure out how to play with them. Yes, I know, but it still has to be recognized. But that story of Juventus, man, maybe I'm just said it there. Maybe I want Juventus to win.
Yeah, look, I think what I find striking about this final compared to the last few years, where you've kind of always had a favorite and clear underdog. And I think there is a favorite and underdog here. I think the favorite is Real Madrid and the underdog is Juventus, but it's not quite that cut and dry that it's been the past few years where, you've had, Dortmund was in there one year against Bayern, and they're always going to be considered just that little bit below them. You had Atleti in there against Real Madrid twice, which was always going to be that. You haven't necessarily had a final where it was clear, where it was clear for the last sort of, I think, 2 months of the season, maybe even 3 months of the season, who the best two teams in the world were. And I do say world, and I dismiss South American soccer when I say that, and I admit that I don't follow it as closely as I'd like to or should, but I do believe that the European teams consistently show that they generally are the best in the world. But at any rate, they're the best two in Europe, and they clear as day were, right? Like this was a collision course that was going on, and it was hard to see anything going against it. In fact, I think the only team I could have seen taking one out would be Atletico Madrid, simply because of the way that they play. That said, I don't know how to separate them because I can make a narrative in my own head for how either win.
Exactly.
I do tend,
right?
Yeah, exactly. I do tend to think that the high-end talent, offensive talent by Real Madrid might carry the day. And that's not what I want. I'm no Juve fan by any means, but I've bought in fully to the Gigi Buffon kind of narrative that this would be the crowning achievement of his career. Although, I think he might have another tournament in mind next summer that he might want to go out with. But nonetheless, I've kind of bought into that narrative, which is why I will be cheering for Juventus tomorrow. But I do have trouble ultimately if I push myself into a corner and force myself to really look at this objectively. Higuain, as Christian said, has never really come up big. He's their star power up top. Are we going to be able to find enough goals by Juventus to win this? If they're going to win it, they might have to do it the same way Atleti was going to win one of these things. And Atleti almost won it both times. They came close, but nonetheless, in the end, Ronaldo, the talent, the ability to find the back of the goal. And as I've said on this show in different contexts many times, the old adage about defense winning championships is a load of crap when it comes to this game. What wins championships is the ability to find the goal. And I think Real Madrid just has a little bit more of that.
To be the man, you have to beat the man. And tomorrow, just like a challenger, Juventus is going to have to go more like all out, and even going to have to go like almost an out of body experiment to make sure that they're going to have to play like every single player of Juventus is going to have to play out of their mind. That's what I mean. So it's going to be difficult, but I do feel like my head says Madrid 2-0, but I do hope that it's closer, and I do hope Juventus has a shot, but I can't see Madrid fall until somebody beats them.
Yeah, if Juve wins this, I mean, I think I'm not speaking out of turn here. This is hardly a dramatic prediction, but if Juve wins this, I think it's going to have to be one of those like 1-0, maybe a penalty shootout. I saw a prediction earlier today that saw Juve winning in penalties 1-1. I think that's more fan service, because again, the Buffon narrative is pretty strong, right? Like, a lot of people like him as a player. He's just been around so while. It's the same when Rossi retired, or didn't retire, he might as well retire. He's going to NASL. When he left Roma there last week, a lot of people that didn't necessarily cheer for him.
You mean Toddy?
Todd, sorry, yeah.
Hopefully he doesn't go to an ASL. Maybe we'll touch this on the next block, but no. He can't go to an ASL. No. That can't happen. Like, he has to either not play. You can't. Anyways.
Rossi, that's Jesus. What am I talking about? I know why I said that, but
because you said it because it's an American play for your Roma, but
because I saw him yesterday. Yeah, I saw him on Twitter. That's what. Yeah. Anyway, when Tati retired, a lot of people that weren't his fans necessarily sort of grew to appreciate just his ever presence, and Buffon's the same way. There's this sort of classiness, like Italians carry themselves in a certain way, and I like Italians, so I'm probably speaking a little too much here, but nonetheless, there's something about them that makes you kind of like just respect them at some point, and I think that's where he is in his career. And there's so many people out there that want to make that happen, want to see that happen. But if you put a gun to my head, as I said earlier, I think it's going to be Real Madrid 3, Juventus 1.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, let's take a break.
You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS postgame show, open lines after dark, 5 rings daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
All right, welcome back. Talk about a 180. We're going to go, Kevin, from talking about the Champions League final, the biggest football game in the world, to the Canadian Premier League, a league that hasn't started yet and has 2 clubs.
Yeah, true. 2 clubs, few potential cities, a lot of rumors, a lot of interest, but yeah, quite a big dichotomy there.
Yeah,
I can say dichotomy. I actually watched the spelling bee yesterday, so I've actually bettered my vocabulary.
Dichotomy, juxtaposition, all those sort of things. Yeah. They might even, quick, there's a little news to you. I don't know what's going about this, so I'm just going to throw it out there. I tweeted the link out there. It was from a CFL blog. Apparently, Hamilton City Council is rejecting the idea that the Tiger Cats have the ability to put a soccer team in there without negotiating the lease. So hopefully that gets resolved. I can't imagine it not, but nonetheless, that was something.
You know what it looks like to me there? It looks like somebody like, oh, wait, this is getting traction. We can make more money off of this thing. Wait a second before you play here. You need to pay your fee.
Yeah, look, and that's so damn Canadian and so damn municipal politics too at the same time. All right, let's move from that. We don't know much about it. We'll follow that one. I think that the hearing is going to be Wednesday. So if something happens there, we'll obviously get someone from Hamilton on to talk about it, but we'll leave it well enough alone for now. 2 pieces of news came out yesterday in the Canadian Premier League news. I reported one, and the other one was, well, I reported it, but it was more Paul Byrne going on the Voyageurs board, which is, it's hilarious how these things break sometimes. Paul Byrne just decided to jump in and throw a grenade into the middle of things.
You know what I like though? Before you mention it, I like how sometimes Paul likes to stop speculation and maybe reveal sometimes too much, but he'd rather give more information and stop false rumors and speculation to continue.
Yeah, look, and what he said, what he reported was that there won't be, very likely, he didn't say it definitively, but he sort of implied it heavily, that there won't be anything approaching what we would call a Canadian quota in this league. That is to say that there will be not like some kind of, a need to play X amount of Canadians or to have X amount of Canadians on your roster. Now, what this is a bit of splitting hairs, but it's an important split of the hair because and I'll get to that in a minute, but basically the other side of this is that what there will be, though, is a restriction on the amount of imports you can bring in. Now, you might be saying to yourself, isn't that the same thing? If you could only have 7 non-Canadians on the roster, does that not mean that if the roster is 20, that there has to be 13 Canadians on the roster? Yes, it does. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to go up to 13. If your roster limit is 20, you could go to 15, or you could go to 16, or you could go to 17. That seems pretty reckless to only go that short. I imagine the rosters would be a bit bigger than that. But what it allows you to do, what it prevents happening, is creating a scarcity drag on the Canadian spots. And the reason that the owners are resistant towards having something that's a quota for Canadians is for that very reason. If you put a quota on there, that puts a premium on those spots, which in turn, from a salary perspective, from a negotiation perspective, when you're trying to get things in line on a salary cap league, makes it very difficult for you to sign the type of Canadians you need to sign for the type of money you need to sign them at. And that's kind of not the stuff that sports fans want to talk about, but it's kind of the stuff that matters to ownership and should matter to you if you care about the future of the Canadian Premier League moving past the launch, because it has to be financially viable. And if you have Canadians demanding salaries that aren't in line with what their contributions are going to be, then it's going to be very difficult. Paul Byrne has direct experience with this, Kevin. In year one, and I know non-TFC fans that are in MLS fans don't like to admit this, but in year one, TFC had to sign 8 Canadians, and it killed them on the cap and probably killed them for the next 2 years in terms of them dragging themselves out of that cap mess they got themselves into because of that very real situation that occurred with the Canadian demands. And Whitecaps fans and Impact fans that like to point out that they launched better were not faced with the same restrictions. And I'll just say that from my very brief TFC partisanship right there. Kevin,
I understand, and like I get it, because if player agents know you have to sign 8 Canadians and one of their representative is like a top Canadian that you want because of his skill set, and on top of it he's Canadian, you have the certain amount of the offer and demand, and the price goes up. I understand, but by limiting the amount of import is effectively going to maybe do the same thing as having more Canadian players playing. But you control, wouldn't that happen the same way, that maybe the quality of the import that we will see will be limited, maybe because, well, they know that they can demand more if they fall into the price range, no?
Yeah, but an import's going to be probably coming in at a higher skill level. And this is the thing that I think all fans of this league need to get themselves prepared for, is that the stars of the league in the early days are likely not going to be Canadian. The Canadians are going to be the plumbers, and there's going to be some young kids that emerge that are going to excite us as Canadian fans. But the guys that are winning the Golden Boots, the MVP, I suspect will be the imports, because they're going to need to go out and find guys of that caliber, because they and I've said this a couple times before, and I'll say it again right now. The primary goal of the Canadian Premier League is not to develop players. That is a symptom of it. It is something that's going to happen because of it, and that's something that we're excited about. Yeah, but what's the goal of the Canadian Premier League is to bring spectator culture and soccer culture to all parts of this country, which in turn then creates the next generation. We're seeing it in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver now, where these young kids have come through in a time where they, like Raheem Edwards. Raheem Edwards was 11 when Danny Dichio scored the goal, right? He grew up in an era where there was for top flight professional soccer in his backyard. That's the idea that's going to happen in Winnipeg and in Regina and Saskatoon maybe, and Calgary, and hell, like even centers like Trois-Rivières or Kingston or something like that down the line. That's their long-term goal, so that it's everywhere, and you're going to mine the country completely just based on sort of that osmosis of players that come up through loving the game and falling in love with the game from watching it. Directly squeezing the Canadian Premier League and finding a national team is not necessarily going to be the case. And to do that, to create that excitement, well, who did I just say? Raheem Edwards was 11 when who scored? Danny Dichio. Danny Dichio's not Canadian. There's going to be Danny Dichios in this league. There's going to be imports that come in that contribute to Canadian soccer in a way that's more inspirational. Some of them will stick around and coach after. That's why it's important to also get the right kind of imports coming in, and why I think in the early days you're likely to see some of the big end talent be international, and you might even be surprised at the quality. And I suspect that they'll do something like MLS has done, and the guys that come in will be older, maybe with the name recognition in certain communities or whatever, and that's okay. I think that's perfectly fine. I don't think you're going to see Atiba Hutchinson come in the Canadian Premier League. You might see, a guy like, say, if Jonathan Rosario is out of contract, maybe you'll bring a guy like that in on a Canadian level. But you're not going to get the top Canadian guys out there. Not that there's many anyway.
Yeah, that's true. And you're right. We're going to see example. A Devayo from Montreal, a Drogba. What those players have done, the same type of things will be done to Canadian Premier League teams. You'll see. So yeah, it will be fascinating to see though, because when do we see it happen? The league being created in front of our eyes, and we've been, in those memories on Facebook. 2 years ago, you wrote an article that's called "A League is Coming." Took 2 years. The league is coming, and we will see those things that we talk about all the time. A lot of the leagues happen in our league, in our cities, with our players. Some of them will be imports, some of them will be local, some of them will be players that you played with when you were kids, some of them will be players that maybe your kids played with, and 10 years down the road will be playing in that league. And that's kind of the exciting thing that exists about this league. If you want to look at it long term, 20, 30 years down the road, hopefully when it will be still here, because it's important when you build that pyramid, the base has to be strong so the top stays there forever. And I hope that that's what's going to happen.
All right. Moving on to this one. Speaking of the base being strong, this is the one that's getting a lot of flaps going. It's the number one upvoted thread on Reddit right now, on the MLS Reddit. It's I had heard this from a couple different places, and I confirmed it with a couple different people. And I know everyone's sick of me doing anonymous sources when it comes to this, but it's the only way the information gets out there. That the Canadian Premier League will launch not with Pro-Rel in place, because that's insane. They will launch with a plan to build towards Pro-Rel once they hit 16 teams. Now, let's unpack that a little bit. They're going to probably launch with maybe 6 teams. So getting to 16 is not going to happen overnight, guys. And I think most people do understand that, but some of the more rabid advocates of promotion and relegation might be thinking that Pro-Rel is coming to Canada in like 2 years or something. No, probably more like 10 or 15 even. So that's get things in line. Like, how long did it take MLS to get to 16 teams? Toronto came in as the 11th. So we're looking at least maybe was it Vancouver? Was it Montreal? Might have been the 16th team. I don't know. Philly, something like that. So it was a long time. We're talking, nearly 20 years, right? So let's get this thing under control that way. But that said, is this a good idea, Kevin? Is it the way to go? Is it okay? Is it something to not fear?
Well, I think the plan to have promotion relegation for 16 is to actually lay the groundwork for when there's actually more team and it makes more sense for the promotion relegation. I think down the road, if you go back to the Paul Brennan interview 2 weeks ago, he was not shy about saying 28, 30, 40 teams. There's no cap limit on the amount of teams that could be in this country's league. If you're looking at the markets of 200,000 and over, there's a lot of possible teams, 20, 30 possible markets in that scenario. And when that number will be reached, promotion relegation will not only be a thing possible, almost be necessary, because of the amount of team you want to create, a certain scarcity in the championship and the value of all those things. So I do feel that it's to lay the groundwork for maybe what's going to be even further down the road, what could be 2 divisions of Canadian Premier League.
Look, this is a complicated argument. I'm going to write an article a little later on, because this is something that the nuance of what I'm about to say, I think, demands written form so that it can be spelled out a little clearer. But I think there are some fundamental differences between Canada and the United States in terms of population and size and everything else that makes this kind of plan more realistic, and it makes it even maybe necessary. The United States just has so many markets that are so big that have enough money and backers and finances behind it that they can just sort of exist in infinity, demanding expansion fees. I don't think the same thing exists in Canada, where realistically, well, how the CFL is how old, right? It's like hundreds of years old and it has 9 teams? Like, that's sort of the realistic upper end level of major metropolitan centers in Canada. There's some growing out there, those mid-sized markets, but a mid-sized market in Canada wouldn't even be on the radar in the United States. You're talking about towns like London, Ontario, which are like 500,000, or Kitchener-Waterloo, which is a little bit bigger.
Yeah, like Laval. Oh, well, Laval's a little bigger. It's getting closer to 1 million. But like the Oakvilles or the Hamiltons. Yeah, you're right. It's big. Like it's a big market, Hamilton. But compared to, I can just name 10 American cities right now that dwarfs pretty much everything outside of Montreal and Toronto.
Yeah, and look, in order to encourage and to create a situation where they might those type of markets might be able to one day rise up and aspire to get to a fully professional league to compete at the top against other Canadian cities, you're going to need to provide them with sort of a soft way in. And I think more when they look at this promotion and relegation idea to launch at 16, it's like that they've looked at they can realistically maybe get to 16 markets, but to get beyond that, and I don't think the plan is to stop at 16. In fact, I've heard him say that he sees a league that's as big as 20, so that'd be 2 leagues of 10 if you're talking about 2 divisions. And to be clear, I think we're looking at a semi-open pyramid here, not a fully open pyramid. I can't imagine a situation where you have a third tier.
No, exactly. You buy into the Division 2, and it might be a little cheaper, but you prove yourself as a team, and you eventually get good enough and gather a strong enough support that you go and be promoted.
Yeah. Look, I grew up in Belleville, as people know. Belleville is a center that is a little over 100,000 people right now in terms of the region. That's in an English concept. You could see a professional team being there. It would probably play in like League 2 or something, right? Well, right now there's nothing in place for cities that size to really aspire, because there's no way that Belleville could create a team or enough investment to aspire to be part of the Canadian Premier League launch, or even within the first decade. But if there's a second tier out there at 16 teams, there might come a day somewhere down the line where someone in that city, and I'm just using the city as an example because I'm familiar with it, right? They might say, you know what, we could get up to that level and we might be happy at that level. And I think that some people, when they think pro-rel, they think, they think they're swinging for the fences. They think, about getting to the very top. Whereas the other thing pro-rel provides, and I've never hated pro-rel. I've always liked it. I just thought it was unrealistic right now in North America. And I still wonder a little bit. I think you could probably put it in the United States, but that's an argument for another day. If you create pro-rel, you create a lower tier, you then get cities to aspire to rise up to that tier, because that might be their level. And they may never imagine in their wildest dreams that they go beyond, that they go up to the very top, but they do imagine that they could get to this certain level and be happy there. And I think that in turn does have an inspirational possibility down the line. It's going to take years. And the key and one of the biggest differences between the Canadian Premier League launching with a plan to get there and MLS just suddenly implementing it right now is exactly that. You are going in eyes wide open at this point. And this is the advantage, and I've said this before in different contexts, this is the advantage of the Canadian Premier League over MLS in the early days, is they've seen what happened with MLS, and they saw what MLS did right, and they saw what MLS did wrong. And this might be something that they've identified as that MLS doing wrong, because right now within a Major League Soccer context, it would be exceptionally difficult to implement pro-rel because of the amount of investment that's coming in there. You can't ask someone to put $150 million into a franchise and then immediately relegate them, right? Like it's think about that for a minute. You're opening yourself up to lawsuits.
To lawsuits, to big losses of money, resources, to bankruptcies, it's not feasible. Like doesn't make an economical sense.
But meanwhile, the Canadian Premier League is asking, from what I've been told, for about $1.5 million as the buy-in. If you buy in $1.5 million and go, in 15 years, this might happen, and you might be playing at this level, but you have 15-year head start over the teams that are going to be coming in around then. So if you can't figure it out, then it's on your luck.
Well, yeah, it's on you. Exactly.
Yeah. All right. I think we can unpack that one a lot more, but let's take a break. We'll come back and we'll wrap the show up with looking at the weekend ahead.
You are listening to SPN Radio, powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
Welcome back.
Yeah, and Duane, we're talking about the games of the week. We're not nice to the teams that played on Wednesdays. We barely talked about it quickly last Wednesday, May 31st. Columbus 3, Seattle 0, big win for Columbus. NYCFC 2, New England 2, Orlando 2, DC United nothing. The Dynamo 5, Real Salt Lake 1. It was a big game, and that brings us to tonight, Duane. Portland and San Jose in the Friday night match.
A big one for Portland there, for sure, because the Timbers have not been playing very well of late, and they do need to sort of get moving if they want to get up and considered to be where they are. There's a lot of talk about Portland needing some help at the back. Borchers, they haven't really been able to replace him. He's maybe the difference between this team and their championship team from a few years ago. So I think that they're going to be needing to get rolling a little bit more soon, but nonetheless, reinforcements maybe coming in there. Kevin, when you look at the games of the week, obviously, first off, why are you playing games that cross over with the Champions League final there, MLS? One day I will figure their head out when it comes to that. But
like the TV numbers of NYCFC versus Philadelphia will be very, very poor.
I mean, in fairness, it is only crossing over a little bit. So we got but the Sporting Kansas City Minnesota game is 5:00 Eastern. So if that goes into extra time, why do you even play with it?
Well, the idea I think behind it too, but it's not on big TV channels. If like that 1 p.m. game was on Fox or FS1 or something, you kind of want to get that TV audience that's almost in front of the TV ready to watch soccer to tune into this game while they wait to tune into the Champions League. And I can understand the game after. Actually, on ESPN, that makes sense. Where people will just finish watching soccer, they're still at the pub, you're at home, and you have the party with you. When you change channel, and another game of soccer, you'll leave it on. But yeah, I don't think it makes that much sense. I think the 5 p.m. I can get it, but maybe not the 1 p.m. But well, it's on MLS Live and Comcast Network, and yes, so I don't think they're expecting big ratings, anyways.
Yeah, at least there's not one directly on there against it before. There's a couple. There was like two seasons in a row when TFC had a game that was directly started at 3 p.m. for a 2:45 Champions League start. Just dumb stupidity. Anyway, regardless. Let's look at the rest of the weekend though. What jumps out at you, Kevin, when you look at this MLS schedule as what you're beyond? Putting the Champions League final aside, what do you think the game to watch this weekend is?
Vancouver Atlanta is going to be interesting. A very, very big travel for Atlanta. And the way Vancouver marketed that game is actually quite interesting. That will be on TSN1, TSN4, and MLS Live and Spock Sports Southwest in Atlanta, 5:30 p.m. on Saturday, Duane. The promotion for the video they put on social media was all the goals Atlanta scored in 60 seconds this year, 27 goals in 60 seconds or something. And why aren't you talking about your team? Why are you hyping up the team that's coming into town? Are you afraid they're going to beat you? You want people to come in to see them? No, talk about the Whitecaps. I don't know. I just thought it was kind of curious to put a video of all the goals that your next opponent scored promoting the game that you're going to have against them.
It's how the Toronto Raptors used to, I should say the Vancouver Grizzlies, maybe. That's how they used to market themselves.
Come see Jordan. Come see Jordan.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I just said the Raptors used to do the same thing for years and years too. It was only, in the last 5 or 6 years that they discovered that maybe we should promote our own team rather than the teams we're playing. So yeah, that is a bit of a strange one. No, if I'm going to look at this whole schedule though, a couple games jump out, and I'm going to go off the MLS map a little bit here. I think for a lot of American listeners, and I know we have a lot of them, the game that they'll be looking at, I'll be on the men's friendly, which is at 10 p.m., and I will be watching that one too, as long as I'm not completely spun out by football by that point. But 2 a.m. Sunday morning, which is an awfully bad time to watch a game, but nonetheless, the under-20s will play against Venezuela in their quarterfinals in the U20s, and that would be looking to get to an historical high-water mark for an American team at that level. So that would be something that I think a lot of our American listeners would be looking forward to. I think that Houston-Seattle game, the very final MLS game of the weekend, is the one that is most interesting to me because simply put, you have a Houston team that is playing very, very well, very well at home and very, 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 very bad on the road, playing on the road against a Seattle team that's just not playing well at all. So what happens there? That's kind of intriguing to me.
Well, yeah, it is. And in the Eastern Conference, Montreal Impact versus the Red Bulls, a kind of interesting matchup too, because we all agree Montreal on paper is better than 11th in the Eastern Conference, but they have only 11th game played. So you have that aspect too, that some teams have 15. So there's a big difference in the amount of games played. Montreal with the very emotional high of the home and away series against Vancouver. The what looked to be a blowout and wasn't at the end. Very emotional, but they got the job done. Hopefully, they can carry this into this game. Patrice Bernier was subbed early in that game, and yes, there was a big difference once he was taken off the field for Montreal. That's when Vancouver turned things around. But maybe that does show a little bit of what cards Mauro Biello has in his hands by subbing him off early. Probably a start. Probably going to see a midfield of Donadel, Bernier, and Zamali. And that is the key for Montreal. The Zamali quickly finding his bearings in Montreal and has scored his first goal midweek. And I think we're going to see a very different Montreal Impact team on Saturday and for the weeks to come. So I do feel it's going to be an important game to either continue that progression for Montreal and maybe climb in that standings, or the Red Bulls will maybe stop their dip and maybe they will come back and be stronger than before. And you know what, Duane? The return of Jesse Marsh to Montreal is always interesting. Same for Felipe. So I am looking forward to tomorrow's game.
Yeah, in terms of the TFC game, New England is a place that the Foxborough, I should say, really is a place that they have always had a lot of demons in. It has had, that's where Danny Koopman's knee got blown out and basically ended his career, and any hope they had that season. It's a place where they've had really sideways scores hung on them a lot of times. So if they can go into New England and play on that crappy turf and get a job done, I think maybe we really should start thinking about how high Toronto FC's point totals can be this year. So this one's going to be a tricky one for them, but nonetheless, that's there. If you're looking for a train wreck game to watch, FC Dallas, RSL. RSL is, not doing very well.
Colorado at home against Columbus. I wouldn't be surprised if Columbus puts 2-3 past Colorado and past Tim Howard and gets the job. Tim Howard's not there.
Well,
so past McMath, yeah.
Yeah, it'd be McMath time. All right,
well,
Kevin.
McMath time might be better because McMath has been the better part of the equation. I'm sorry for the pun, but I think that's truly, Colorado's dip. We talk about, their big dip. No, the big fluke was last year. They've been terrible the last 4 years. And yes, last year was the fluke. This year's just continuing the same course.
All right, fair enough. Any final thoughts on the week, on the day, on the final, on anything, Kevin?
Stay tuned to the Sports Podcasting Network as usual tomorrow night. Off the Woodworks post-game show after the game. I'll be at the stadium. You can look forward for videos, live video on our Facebook page at sportspodcastingnetwork.com and on facebook.com/sportspodcastingnetwork. You can follow Duane on Twitter at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramee. If you like what we do, you like this show, you would like to give us a little pat in the back, talk to your soccer friends about the show. Help us grow the show. Help us spread the good news of soccer every day, Monday to Friday, usually 10 a.m. Sometimes due to scheduling, we change a day or two, but usually Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. Give us a hand that way or on patreon.com. That's patreon.com/sports podcasting network. With your help, we can do a lot more. And it's not a lot. Like right now, we have about 17 patrons for about $52 a month. It's very limited. It covers almost the cost of our subscription to go live and stuff like this. But with your help, and over the months, over the years, it actually helped pay for some equipment. But with your help and with more of your donations, we can do more. We're talking about if everyone that listens to this show, or if 1 out of 2 or 3 persons that listen to this show, we would have the resources to do this full time and give you an independent coverage of soccer in North America that can almost not be found anywhere else right now. With your help, we can do a lot more. Patreon.com/sports podcasting network. And as always, until next time, for Duane Rollins, I'm Kevin Laramee, and have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.